Hello again, this is your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley, back for another episode of the History of Comic Books podcast, and once again beginning with part 2 of the life of Charles Schultz. The last time we left off, Charles Schultz had just started work on his Little Folks strip and was about to finally break into the cartooning world, but he still had a little ways to go. Around this same time, he started dating Judy Halverson, no relation to his mother's side of the family, a fellow Minnesota School Art alumni student. And while never formally proposing to her, let it know that he did want to get married but was turned down. His friends also noted Charles wanted marriage very much and apparently pursued Judy too hard. When Judy stated she wanted to be an artist, Schultz even offered they could each have their own studio, but she didn't even agree to that. His personal problems aside, Schultz went to Chicago in 1947 to personally propose to the syndicates, specifically the Chicago Tribune and the New York News Syndicate, but didn't even make it past the receptionist as he failed to make an appointment first. Undeterred, he went to Harold H. Anderson at the Publishers Syndicate, who said Schultz's strip was not professional enough. It was a slight that Schultz would never forget, and when he crossed paths with Anderson years later, he would berate him for not trying to be more personable, asking where he was from or how was his trip. In turn, whenever Charles Schultz would serve as a mentor to budding cartoonists who sought him out, he often would take them to lunch and ask them about their personal life. However, Walt Dixon at the Chicago Times Syndicate did like his submissions, but when he passed them on to the president, Schultz was once again turned down. Despite being full of rejections, Schultz returned home encouraged, as he felt he was closer than ever to his dream. He at least got a few people in his chosen profession to like his work. Now he needs someone to hire him. That almost happened when Charles Schultz received a letter from Walt Disney inviting him for a standard one-month tryout to a potential salary of $22.50 a week. He was tempted, as his first editor, Roman Baltz, had worked for the studio on the revolutionary Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs film, but it would mean giving up Little Folks, which, while not a regular strip, had the potential to become something. While he was making only $10 a week from it at best, he was still single and lived with his father, so expenses were obviously low. Ultimately, he was advised against it, with friends and colleagues saying that if he joined Disney, he would just be a cog in a larger machine. Years later, Schultz would counter that, "No, I will have taken over." Nevertheless, the advice proved right, though Schultz may have been onto something, as his creation Snoopy would one day rival Mickey Mouse in popularity. Back at the education department, Schultz continued to work alongside his fellow students Charles Brown and David Ratner, who, when interviewed years later, said Schultz only put on the appearances of being a loser, as he continued to make submissions from February 1947 to June of 1950. All while he started to craft a creation that would define him and his entire profession. Charles Schultz first drew Charlie Brown in spring of 1948, depicting a boy in a huge chase gown with a distinctive look of his feet sticking straight out. For his strip Little Folks, he designed each character as 3 heads tall, though he would eventually change to 2.5 heads tall and would become the standard for his comic strip characters. The look was inspired by Frida Mae Rich, a fellow art student at the Art Institute who was also a dwarf, never growing over 4 feet in height. A talented and dynamic young woman, despite her handicap, she left home on her own for Minneapolis to pursue an art career, where she graduated from the Minneapolis School of Art to become a skilled commercial artist. She worshipped Charles Schultz and was noted for how she leaned on desks while standing. She really didn't have to lean due to her height. Her arms parallel with them, sometimes one hand resting on her face. Something else Charles Schultz would adapt for his future characters. She sat the same way as his characters too, with her legs sticking straight out. It wasn't just a look, though, as while Charlie Brown and his friends were children, he always treated them like adults and aimed the strips at adults as well. No doubt also motivated by his memory of Frida, whom Schultz referred to as a 4-foot-tall woman trapped in a child's body. He also made jokes about their short arms, a further reference to Frida's dwarfism. Back in his personal life, Charles Schultz fully committed to the Church of God when he was baptized at Phelan Lake in summer of 1948, while artistically, he claimed to be a full-blown modernist, though as he soon got caught up in the classical music craze at the time, specifically Beethoven's Second Symphony. He also joined the Book of the Month Club, read War and Peace and The Great Gatsby, all while studying the Bible. Soon he was attending the Church of God convention in Anderson, Indiana in 1949, where he bought a half-page ad in the Pioneer Press presenting the primary doctrines of the Church of God by Charles E. Brown. That name kept appearing in Charles Schultz's life so much, one could almost call it a sign of God. The editor-in-chief of the Gospel Trumpet, the church's newsletter. It quickly became apparent Schultz had 3 rings of friends, those from the old neighborhood, his artistic colleagues, and his church. While he did try to intertwine them at times, they ultimately remained separate. One distinctive thing about Schultz, though, was that he never dated inside the Church of God. He did have a crush on Naomi Cohn, and Naomi would be the name of the last new character in Peanuts in 1998. One thing about Schultz that wasn't a result of his religious conversion, as noted earlier, was his teetotaling ways. This came from Schultz observing how alcohol affected his mother's side of the family, and thus decided to completely abstain from it. He would engage in debates with his friend Charles Brown over this, though, who pointed out that even Jesus turned water into wine, though Schultz would claim that the wine was not fermented, which, quite frankly, wouldn't be much of a miracle, didn't it, if you ask me. On July 1948, Little Folks was rejected by the King's Features, but Ernest Lynn, the director of the Newspaper Enterprise Association, NEA, invited him to Ohio. As a result, Schultz flew on his first airplane and would be hired on. However, just when he thought he broke into the comic strip industry, they broke Schultz's contract and sent him a $100 check for his troubles. Disappointed but undeterred, he produced Young Pillars as a single-panel strip about teenagers for the Gospel Trumpet Company, his youth magazine, as part of the Church of God. Charles Schultz also tried submitting 2-panel strips to the syndicates while dating Donna Marie Mae Johnson, taking her to the Ice Capades in February 1950. However, Schultz may have moved too fast for her as well, as he reportedly told her on the third day he wanted to propose. Meanwhile, he kept pushing to be a comic strip artist, submitting 15 two-tiered panel strips to the United Features Syndicate in New York City. However, there was a long delay due to 20 strips submitted a week at the company, but George Letness eventually noticed it, particularly the strip in which a girl steals a boy's umbrella from him during a rainstorm. Letness liked the fact that the boy didn't stand a chance and wanted to meet Schultz, believing he found something. James L. Freeman, the editorial director of United, promptly invited Charles Schultz to the city for a meeting. Schultz left on June 11th by rail and loved the city of New York immediately. They met at the Daily News building at 220 East 42nd Street. There, United revealed they just wanted one strip, the kid's story Little Folks, and requested 3 columns as a space saver for the strip. Schultz originally resented it, as later strips they greenlit were longer. Freeman also requested the strip contain permanent characters, and Schultz agreed he could do that as well. When he designed his first character for his new Little Folks strip, he showed it to his friend Charles F. Brown and asked if he could name it after him. Brown, after seeing it, jokingly asked if he could look more like Steve Canyon or Superman instead. On June 14th, United offered Schultz a standard 5-year contract in which the syndicate owned the copyright to the strip while they split profits 50-50. Schultz signed the contract and went on a train ride home, treating himself to a steak dinner in celebration. Upon returning, he then bought himself a 1950 Tudor two-door sedan for $1,750 and immediately proposed to Donna, trying to convince her to marry him. Schultz would later learn that Al Weld had proposed to Donna instead, and she had accepted. Her decision was partly influenced by the Korean War breaking out at the time, when with both Schultz and Weld being unmarried veterans, they were technically reservists. They would be called back up to the Army. Donna married Al Weld on October 21st, and she would later inspire Violet in Peanuts comic strip, the little redheaded girl. While his personal life had hit a snag, his professional one was up and running, and his father, and his first year as a syndicated cartoonist, Charles Schultz made more money than his father Carl did in 1 year of an entire career as a barber. His father Carl proudly bragged about his son's success, claiming he was making $2,000 a month. He was exaggerating a bit, as Charles' first check was for $90 that first month, then $500 the second month. However, it is unlikely even Carl would have believed his son would one day earn $30 million a year off his comic strip creation. There were a few snags before launching his strip, though. Cartoonist Ted Knight claimed that the copyright for the title of Little Folks, claiming it was a little too much like his own 1930s defunct Little Folks strip. Schultz countered that he deliberately changed the spelling of little to L-I-L apostrophe to avoid such a conflict, which he told the Copyright Office on July 18th, but they disagreed and rolled with Knight on July 20th. Thus, Schultz and United scrambled to find a new name for the strip. Schultz wanted to name it Charlie Brown or Good Old Charlie Brown, but United rejected those. Then Jim Freeman suggested Peanuts, inspired from the Howdy Doody show, which referred to the children's audience section at the Peanut Gallery. This phrase, sadly, has racist origins, as it originally referred to the black section of the segregated theaters, first used in the 1880s. And then it evolved much better in Howdy Doody, as whenever the character Chief Thunder Thud showed up, he would wave hi to the kids saying, "How, Peanuts?" Schultz hated it, not just because of its racist origins, but also because he felt it was demeaning to children in general. Nevertheless, it was the syndicate's choice, who already had budgeted $388.88 for promotion, and Schultz went with it for now, with the encouragement from his colleagues at the Art Institute. However, whenever book collections of the strip or other specials were made, such as the Charlie Brown Christmas special, Peanuts is never used in the title, sticking only as the name of the strip. In fact, even Charles Schultz himself would never acknowledge the name, and when people asked what he did for a living, Schultz would reply, "I drew that comic strip with Charlie Brown and Snoopy." That wouldn't be the only change made due to the copyright, though, as when Schultz was browsing the comic strips in the paper one day, he noticed that there was a dog named Sniffy, which was the original name of Charlie Brown's dog in Peanuts. Wanting to avoid another copyright fight, Schultz immediately decided to change the name, and remembering his mother's wish for what she wanted him to name his next dog, he changed the name to Snoopy. The Peanuts comic strip debuted on October 2nd, 1950 for the United Features Syndicate, featuring Shermie and Patty, not Peppermint Patty at this point, sitting as Charlie Brown walks by, with Shermie exclaiming in the final panel, "How I hate him." Schultz went out to the newsstand to inquire if any of the papers carried the Peanuts strip. To his disappointment, none did at the time. It didn't help that when readers did discover the script, they were confused by the title, with more than a few asking, "Who is Peanuts?" believing it to be either Charlie Brown or Snoopy. While the strip's names would remain, Schultz did get a bit of satisfaction in this early proof it was a stupid name. Unique to comic strips even today, Schultz never gave a single strip a title. It would be a slow start at first, but Charles Schultz was officially a professional cartoonist. His personal life was about to be an upswing as well when he met Joyce, a 22-year-old woman with a baby. Joyce was a child of poverty who moved around a lot. Being rebellious, at 19, she met Bill Lewis, who at 38 was nearly 20 years her senior, and eloped with him. Joyce was soon pregnant afterwards, but her husband, after giving her $50, disappeared from her life. Their daughter, Meredith Sue Lewis, was born in February 1950, and Joyce moved back to Minneapolis, taking a job as the recorder of deeds for the city to pay for a babysitter, allowing her to go out with her friends, some of whom worked at the Art Institute. And it was through them that she met Charles Schultz. When Schultz met her, he found Joyce talkative and fun, noting her youthful demeanor and appearance. She would look 19 even when she was 40. The two quickly became engaged, and it didn't surprise many of his friends who noted Schultz had been wanting to get married for some time, considering his recent failed engagements. However, a major factor to this, too, was also Meredith, as one friend stated that Schultz fell in love with them both, and probably wouldn't have married Joyce if it wasn't for Meredith. So on April 18, 1951, Charles Schultz married Joyce amongst family and friends, with Schultz adopting Meredith soon afterwards. For years, Charles and Joyce would keep Meredith's true parentage a secret, to the point that they claimed they got married in 1949, so to make Meredith believe that she was born soon afterwards. This was largely to avoid the stigma of adoption at the time, and soon the new family would make another move to do this job. On May 1951, Charles, Joyce, and Meredith moved to Carlisle Springs, Colorado, with the intention of starting a new life together, along with further disguising Meredith's adoption. At the new house, Charles painted a Peanuts mural above Meredith's crib, but soon discovered working at home was a bit too distracting. As a result, Schultz would rent an office downtown to have a place to concentrate on the strip, which by October 1951 was now in 36 papers for the original 7, though it was slow growth that was attributed to the number of characters in the strip, giving readers longer to latch onto. The office was on the second floor of the Golden Arrow building. All the while, Schultz envied the numbers of Pogo by Walt Kelly and the Nancy strips, and had every intention to surpass them. While his professional life chugged along, his personal life expanded as well when Joyce gave birth to Charles Monroe Schultz Jr., nicknamed Monty. He would later change his name legally to Monty Charles Schultz when he became an adult, on February 1st, 1952. The ever-expanding brood was why Schultz had to rent an office outside of work, as he enjoyed being a parent and would rather play with his children over working, thus he needed a physical distance. By February 7th, 1952, John Shelby, the editor-in-chief of Reinhardt & Company, proposed the first paperback collection of Peanuts strip, as the comic was slowly becoming more popular. A popular theme in the strip was developing as well, as the world of Peanuts showed children's problems while girls were the dominant sex, reflecting Schultz's own intimidation by women. His figures were often mocked in the strip, with Charlie Brown's head being called a beach ball. However, the early Charlie Brown was more self-confident, willing to dish out punishment as much as he took it. According to Schultz, he was a flippant little guy at first, and had not yet evolved into the more melancholy character we would come to love today. Soon, a new character was added to further affect Charlie Brown's life in Lucy Van Pelt on March of 1952. Originally, she was based on Meredith, being a more precocious toddler before evolving to the loud, aggressive girl that threw all the other characters off balance. Her name was a direct reference to their friends, Philip and Luann Van Pelt. The Schultzes mostly stayed at home when they moved to Colorado Springs and didn't make friends until 4 months afterwards, which were the Van Pelts. Fritz was a local school teacher at the Whitner Elementary School, and Luann was job hunting with the local employment agency, being sharing the second floor with Charles Schultz's studio. The couple soon became regular visitors at Schultz's house, sometimes 4 nights a week, often playing bridge with Beethoven playing in the background. Shortly after, Charles Schultz would introduce Linus Van Pelt, Lucy's baby brother, in the strip on September 1952, and he would remain a toddler in the strip until 1955. His first name came from Linus Mara, a friend and classmate at Minneapolis School of Art, and a cartoonist himself. Linus would later evolve into an intellectual of the strip and great with his hands. Schultz would state he was his favorite character to draw, especially his blanket. This would follow a theme with many of the Peanuts characters, as many of them would have a prop to Schroeder in his piano. As Linus's blanket, Fritz would claim to have inspired the idea relating to a story of Meredith being clinging with a toy rabbit, and Charles insisting that she put it down, to a point where he hid it from her. Fritz argued that sometimes children need physical objects for comfort, which Charles agreed to and later translated into the strip with Linus's blanket. Little did he know that it would become so iconic that the phrase security blanket would become made into the Webster's Dictionary years later. Despite this incident, Schultz rarely let friends give him ideas for his strip, despite being family or whoever else, at least not directly. As has been shown, and we'll see, Schultz got names, characters, and ideas from observing those around him, but never when an idea was directly presented. Ultimately, all of the ideas for Peanuts came from him and his experiences, though he did use one idea from a reader in Florida that led to a strip in which Charlie Brown tries to teach his younger sister Lucy, who first appeared in March of 1952, the count by asking her how many sailboats she sees in the picture, with her reply being all of them, to his frustration. Others came from watching, such as when Joyce joked that birthdays should be retroactive and one should get gifts for all the ones you missed before you met them, which would soon be proclaimed by Lucy, who was evolving into a translation of Joyce. A joke about snow coming up from the ground came from Meredith, who thought that was so. In addition, Monty's obsession with the Red Baron, the legendary World War I fighter pilot, would also play a large part later in the strip as well. When readers did send on him ideas, Charles would joke that they should send him to Walt Kelly for Pogo instead. As shown, he had plenty of sources already. As for Charles Schultz's friend, Charles Brown, whom he took the name from, he saw a lot of himself in the comic strip character and even appeared on a game show, To Tell the Truth, where the contestants challenged to discover who the really Charlie Brown was. They failed, and in classic Charlie Brown fashion, despite winning, he would state, "But no one picked me." He would later write Me, Charlie Brown, a book of good grief, though Schultz would later deny he took inspiration for his character from him, just the name, stating that the real Charles Brown was too good of a friend to be depicted in such a way. Considering Brown would attempt suicide at one point, it's understandable why Schultz would deny this. Like many creators, he would always state his characters and the strip itself was all he was. The Schultz life in Colorado Springs was short-lived, as they would move back to Minnesota in summer of 1952, with Joyce later claiming so he could be nearer to his dad. As a sign of his growing success, the Schultzes bought a 2-story colonial house on Wentworth Avenue South, complete with a front and backyard, bungalow, and 2-car garage. For a couple who grew up as children eating pancakes for dinner because it was cheap, this was almost unimaginable. Back home, the Art Instructions Incorporated took advantage of their new star graduate when the Buckbees, the conservative Baptist family who co-owned and administered the company, made Schultz a member of the advisory board and assigned him a special studio at the top of the Bureau of Engraving, which his friends called the Penthouse. They even went so far as to groom Schultz to become a full member of the company, but he declined, choosing to focus just on his strip. While there, Schultz started devising other strips outside of Peanuts, such as an action strip and one about bridge, the game he picked up with the Van Pelts. He would do 14 trial episodes of his adventure strip, Joe Cypher, with Jim Sassville, who just come back from a 19-month-long tour with the U.S. Navy. However, this is quickly shut down when, back at the Syndicate, Harry Gilbert said not to do anything that would cut into his work on Peanuts, which was starting to pick up, as by September 1954, Schultz made $2,500 a month at a time when the average salary was $4,000 a year. By 1956, he was making that annual salary of $4,000 a month, along with being double what his father Carl had originally predicted his son would make. Schultz did do some outside work, illustrating 2 volumes of Art Linklater's Kids Say the Darndest Things in 1957 and 1961, along with Dear President Johnson by Bill Adler, a collection of letters in 1964. For the most part, though, Penis would be Charles Schultz's life's work. His notoriety began to soar, too, with a feature of Charles Schultz published in the Saturday Evening Post featuring a picture of him sitting in his father's chair at the family barbershop. Of course, such success would bring others trying to cash in, including rival syndicates to United, who wanted to steal away their rising cartoonists. Notably, Sylvan Bike of King Feature Syndicate, who, like many others, originally rejected Schultz, tried to shine him to his own contract with the potential of him owning the copyright to Peanuts. But Schultz chose to stay with United, finding the arrangement amicable. United, on its part, continued to push Peanuts further, having it translated into Spanish, renaming it Carlitos for the Spanish-language papers. Plus, U.S. college papers started to request Peanuts to run in their comics pages in 1953, replacing Lowell Abner in Cornell's Daily Sun that May. By 1958, the editor of Yale's Record designated Charles Schultz the humorist of the year, and his strip even started to appear in textbooks. It was the February 1st, 1954 strip of Charlie Brown's being envious of his friend's more elaborate train tracks set that had made Peanuts a national icon, as Schultz became the speaker of a generation absorbed in irony and tension. One honor that did elude Schultz early on, though, was membership in the National Cartoonist Society, as he was denied membership in 1956, despite Otto Sluggo's endorsement. He would have finally been admitted in 1959. Schultz believed himself a serious humorist, though mild in demeanor and compared to his fellow cartoonists. Of course, his teetotaler nature was noted, as Mort Walker, the creator of Beetle Bailey, noticed that though Walker would sponsor Schultz to become a member of the National Cartoon Society as well. Plus, a constant theme throughout every Peanuts strip was that it never ended happily. While he wouldn't become a member of the National Cartoon Society in 1959, he thought he would at least win his most prestigious award in 1954. The Reuben, named the design by the legendary cartoonist Rube Goldberg, but lost to sports cartoonist Willard Mullen. Quite frankly, most of his colleagues in the comic strip industry were confused by Peanuts and its creator, as Schultz not only didn't drink, but he abstained from smoking and cursing as well. However, his quiet demeanor hid a fierce competitive nature that would rear his head from time to time, such as when his friend Charles F. Brown stated he was quitting cartooning, which Schultz replied, half-jokingly, "Good, one less person to compete with." No one could deny Schultz pushed himself harder than any other cartoonist in the business, and he wanted to be recognized for it. It wasn't just art that Schultz wanted to excel at as well, but also business. It was very industrious in how further to apply Peanuts. The strip kept growing, appearing in the LA Times on March 13, 1955, then the Reedsville Review on April 4th, the New Orleans State's Item on April 10th, along with the Dallas Morning News and the Fort Worth Press on June 12th. By mid-1955, Peanuts was in 100 papers, then it started to jump to 125 by May, and then 250 by October. By 1957, Peanuts was in 230 daily papers and 102 Sunday papers, along with 16 college papers. By 1958, that number would be 400. Schultz kept improving the pacing and design of Peanuts with more elaborate titles, particularly in the Sunday strips, which started to contain hidden gags. Despite this success, Schultz remained engaged with his fans and was noted for being willing to give away original art at a request, long before anyone knew just how valuable such art would be. Schultz did have fun with his readers, though, occasionally joking about killing off a favorite character at different times. One fan of note was J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, who Schultz sent the August 2nd, 1954 strip, which featured a gag about fingerprints. With the strip itself becoming successful, licensing and advertising were soon to follow, such as Eagle Pencils, which Schultz didn't use, and Eastman Kodak's Brownie Book of Picture Taking. While agreeing on a licensing fee, Schultz and United Features jokingly used the flinch system to set the price, meaning they would set a figure for licensing, and if they flinched, they knew they had the right number. Schultz also would be generous with royalties from licensing, though, believing in splitting it equally, insisting he got a third, United Features got a third, and the licensor a third. If another part was involved, Schultz would call for a four-way split of 25% apiece. This wasn't just Schultz being generous, but also smart, as he understood early on that if a licensor had equal skin in the game, they would work just as hard to make sure that Peanuts product was a success. One of the most unbelievable aspects of Charles Schultz's career was his claim he trained through the mail, which he did through the Federal Schools Incorporated, and would continue to help the Art Institute with entries, with his name appearing on above the letterhead. By March 1st, 1955, United announced it intended to extend Schultz's contract for another 5 years. With professional life secure, he bought a new house for $32,000, which was twice as much as the average home at the time, a 3-story home in the Minnekelly Creek. He continued to be a dedicated Church of God and dutifully tithed 10% of his income. Back home, Schultz continued to be a tradition with his kids painting murals on their walls, this time for Monty. They would soon be joined by Craig Frederick, who was born on January 22nd, 1953. It was long before Joyce was expecting their 4th child. By August 5th, 1956, Amy Louise was born, and the local paper proclaimed a new Peanuts character was born. On August 26, 1956, the National Cartoonist Society voted Schultz Outstanding Cartoonist of the Year and finally received a Reuben from Rube Goldberg himself at the Hotel Astor in New York City. He would later state it was the happiest and loneliest day of his life. By 1957, he was earning $90,000 a year, twice as much as the highest paid college president at the time, and $800,000 in today's dollars. However, he started to avoid public appearances, as he considered his looks homely and fans would be disappointed by him. The Peanuts empire continued to expand, though, when he was contracted by Ford to produce the printed advertisements for How I Sold 1,000,000 Falcons in My Spare Time. It was a particular honor to Schultz, as Ford was considered a man's car at the time, so to be made the pitchman felt like a true achievement for the former meek Midwestern boy. While Schultz tried to avoid the spotlight, it still found him, as when the Saturday Evening Post in January 1957 ran the feature The Success of Utter Failure about his life. Soon it was followed by articles in Look, Life, and Time magazine. It was a theme that Schultz would carry throughout his entire life, and stating on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson that failure was everything, even joking that Charlie Brown now got more fan mail than he did. He did sell the image that Charlie Brown was his soulmate, though he would later admit it was just good story in the New York Times in 1969. When Schultz did make appearances, he always would draw Snoopy on a chalkboard before his audience and then proclaim, "Just to prove I'm not a fake." These appearances would soon be called Chalk Talks, where he would preach the faith while also talking about his peanuts. With the Church of God, he started a scholarship fund in Anderson, Indiana. Youth Pillars also dedicated profits to the church, along with a collection of the youth cartoons, which provided royalties to the church as well. Schultz also served as a Sunday school teacher, treasurer, member of the Board of Education, deacon, and trustees, along with being a lay preacher. Soon he helped fund the new Church of God building in Minneapolis at the East 38th Street and 38th Avenue South, where he served as assistant pastor in 1958. For Schultz, he saw no problem being a cartoonist and a Christian at once, and even met Billy Graham in August 1957. One myth about Charles Schultz is that he loved kids, being the creator of a children's strip in Peanuts. However, Charles Schultz would always insist that Peanuts was an adult strip just starring kids, and while he did love his own children, wasn't particularly interested in children in general. As a result, he often refused to ever license Peanuts for children's products. To him, Peanuts was a second family, and they were meant for adults. The success of Peanuts did have a negative aspect of Schultz as well, as he started to suffer from panic attacks and back out of public events, to the point that Joyce would drop him off at the airport only to find him back home before she even got back. That didn't stop his success, as on April 1965 he became the first cartoonist to win the Reuben twice, but didn't go with Harry Gilbert accepting it instead. Schultz wasn't even safe at home, as reporters would show up at his house and even Joyce would be interviewed, admitting that she called herself Lucy on April 1962, but hated it. However, Schultz started to model Lucy more and more after Joyce, along with a bit of her mother, too. Lucy's favorite phrase, "snap out of it," came from his mother-in-law. Perhaps the biggest compliment, came from Pogo cartoonist Walt Kelly, who proclaimed Charlie Brown and Lucy Van Pelt to be the perfect American couple, an ineffectual male and a domineering female. That's not to say that Joyce didn't enjoy being Mrs. Charles Schultz, and especially his money, which he used to buy furniture and the latest modern appliances for the house, along with managing the finances in general. However, when Joyce would complain to him about not being involved in the family or her more, he would start drawing, similar to how Schroeder would ignore Lucy by playing his piano. Joyce did set out to better herself, buying a Baldwin baby grand piano and enrolled in classes at McPhail School of Music in Minneapolis, majoring in piano while minoring in violin. All of this was encouraged by Schultz. And with that, we will conclude for now on the life of Charles Schultz. But join me again next week. We continue on his miraculous rise to success, while Charles Schultz also tries to make a stab at some other strips, but not to quite the success. And now it is January 9th, 2025, time for the favorite comic of the week. Fantastic Four, number 27 by Ryan North and Stephen Cummings. This is once again another great one-issue story that finds, this time focusing on the adopted daughter of Ben Grimm and Alicia Masters, Nick Masters Grimm, who, by the way, is also a Skrull, as she deals with living on Earth and also how the world perceives her shape-shifting ability as, well, monstrous. This is just a great issue that really highlights Nick and shows how a great character was, and once again emphasizes the whole family aspect of the Fantastic Four, which is the big reading aspect of it, and and she's just a great character in general, with the way she interacts with her cousins, Valerie and Nathaniel, Reed and Sue's children, and also her brother, and it's just a lot of fun. And also, you especially like how she interacts with her dad, who Ben Grimm, best dad ever. And it's masked by Steve Cummings' gorgeous art, which has a nice cartoony style to it, and really shows off her shape-shifting abilities. Ryan North's just been killing it with the Fantastic Four these last few years. He's probably one of the best runs in the comic book in a very long time. Great read in general, and the fact that you can just pick up one issue, you get a full story, and that's it. You don't see that a lot in comic books nowadays. You wish you did see more of that in the other books. But yeah, great reading, and probably one of the best Fantastic runs of Fantastic Four in years. And with that, we will conclude for this archive edition of Charles Schultz. Join me again next week for the next part. And until then, go out and enjoy yourself a good comic book. And yeah, definitely go back and check out Fantastic Four by Ryan North. He's been killing it lately.